You tell yourself churches are safe. They're the places you go when you're overwhelmed, when you need quiet, when you want to step outside the noise of everything else. Even if you're not especially religious, you still feel that shift when you walk in: stone and stained glass, candles and echoes, a space built for whispers instead of shouts. Now imagine this. It's a fall night on a college campus in California, 1974. The air smells like eucalyptus and asphalt cooling after the sun. You're 19. Newly married. Far from home for the first time. You walk toward the big church in the middle of campus because you had an argument with your husband about something small and stupid, tire pressure, and you told him you needed a minute, you wanted to pray. You pull open the heavy door, step into the dim light, and let it close behind you. Outside, the campus keeps moving. Students laugh, bikes click past, a security guard does his rounds. By morning, the church will still be locked from the inside. And you won't be alive to open it. You're listening to Fear Files, Real Cases. Dark Details. Tonight, we're in Stanford, California, walking into Stanford Memorial Church to look at the 1974 murder of 19-year-old Arlis Perry, a newlywed who went to pray after an argument and was found posed and murdered near the altar the next morning. A case that stayed unsolved for more than 40 years, until DNA pointed back to the man who said he'd found her. This story involves a real, brutal killing in a church setting. I'm going to stay away from graphic detail, but please listen with care. Arlis Perry didn't grow up in California. She was Arlis K. Dykema, from North Dakota, quiet, devout, and serious. She and Bruce Perry were high school sweethearts in Bismarck. In August 1974, they got married and moved to Stanford University so Bruce could continue as a pre-med student. Arlis found work as a receptionist at a local law firm and the two lived in student housing at Escondido Village. They were young, broke, and trying to figure out adult life in a place that didn't feel anything like home. On October 12, 1974, they spent the evening like a lot of student couples do, walking around campus, talking. At some point, they got into a small argument about the car's tire pressure. Not a relationship-ending fight, just one of those tense little flare-ups that happen when you're tired and stressed. Arlis told Bruce she wanted to go to Memorial Church to pray. He went back to their apartment. She walked toward the church alone. Stanford Memorial Church sits at the center of campus, arches, mosaics, high ceilings. Even at night, it looks solid and permanent, the kind of place where you might go to clear your head and talk to God, or just to be alone without feeling like you're really alone. Around 11:30 p.m., Arlis was seen heading toward the church. Witnesses later remembered a young woman with long hair going in, and a young man with sandy-colored hair nearby, never definitively identified. Inside, the lamps would have been low. The big nave mostly dark, with softer light near the altar. A few people came and went that night, some to sit, some to pray, some to lock up. At some point after Arlis went in, the heavy doors closed. And stayed closed. Back at the apartment, Bruce waited for his wife to come home. Midnight came and went. By 3 a.m., she still wasn't back. That's when he picked up the phone. He called Stanford police to report her missing, told them she'd gone to pray in Memorial Church and never returned. Officers from the Santa Clara County Sheriff's Office were sent to check the church. They tried the doors. All of the outer doors were locked. No one answered from inside. They left. Whatever was happening in that building stayed behind those locked doors until morning. The next person to go into the church was a man named Stephen Crawford. Crawford was a campus security guard and a former Stanford police officer. He had keys to the building. He later told investigators he'd locked up the church shortly after midnight, checked it again around 2 a.m., and found everything normal. That later check would turn out not to be true. Around 5:45 a.m. on October 13, Crawford said he returned to open the church for the day. This time, he said, he found one of the side doors unlocked and slightly ajar, as if forced from the inside. He stepped into the quiet building, walked toward the front, and saw something in the dim light near the east transept, close to the altar. It was Arlis. She was lying on her back, hands positioned on her chest. She had been violently assaulted and killed. Her body had been staged. There was a puncture wound to her head from an ice pick, and parts of her clothing had been removed and arranged around her. Candles from the altar had been used in a way that made the crime feel not just sexual, but symbolic. The details were horrible enough that even veteran investigators would remember the scene for decades. The church, which was supposed to be the safest place on campus, had become a sealed crime scene overnight. Investigators arrived, and Memorial Church filled up with people who were not there to pray. They searched the building and photographed everything. On a kneeling cushion near Arlis's body, they found semen. On one of the altar candles, they found a partial palm print. Neither matched her husband. Neither clearly matched Crawford, at least not with the tools police had at the time. Bruce Perry, like most spouses in this situation, was an early suspect. He'd argued with his wife the night she died, he'd reported her missing, and he was the person closest to her in the world. But his alibi and later testing ruled him out. Detectives looked at everyone they knew had been near the church that night: staff, other visitors, people seen coming and going. A passerby described a young man with sandy hair about to enter the church around midnight, watchless, of medium build. That man was never officially identified. They also looked hard at Stephen Crawford. He was the one who locked up, the one with keys, the one who said he found the body. His story about checking the doors at 2 a.m. didn't hold up under scrutiny. But the physical evidence they had, partial prints, biological samples, wasn't enough, in the 1970s, to point definitively to him or to anyone else. For years, the case stayed in a grim limbo. Outside the church, life at Stanford went on: lectures, football games, exams. Inside families' living rooms, though, the murder of Arlis Perry became one of those stories you didn't forget. A young woman, newly married, killed in a church on a world-famous campus? It felt too strange, too brutal, too symbolic to be random. The rumor mill did what rumor mills do. Some people whispered about satanic rituals. The way Arlis's body had been staged, with candles and specific positioning, felt to them like it had to mean something beyond one man's violence. Others pointed to a string of other murders and attacks around the Stanford area in the early 1970s and wondered if a serial predator was at work. Then the case picked up another layer of infamy. In the late 1970s and 1980s, investigative writer Maury Terry and others started tying Arlis's murder, in their theories, to a wider network of supposed occult crimes. Terry linked the case, loosely and controversially, to the Son of Sam shootings in New York, pointing to letters from David Berkowitz where he mentioned Arlis Perry by name. To the public, it sounded like a movie plot: a murdered young woman, a church, a famous serial killer dropping her name in prison letters, hints of a coast-to-coast cult. To investigators actually working the case, it didn't hold up. They interviewed Berkowitz in prison. They went through what he could and couldn't know. In the end, local authorities said they didn't find anything of real investigative value in his claims about Arlis. Still, the satanic ritual angle stuck in the public imagination for decades, even as detectives quietly did something much less flashy. They kept the evidence. They waited for science to catch up. The case never closed. For more than 40 years, Arlis Perry's murder was one of the cold cases reviewed regularly by the Santa Clara County Sheriff's Office and the District Attorney's Cold Case Unit. The biological evidence, semen, hair, was retested as new methods came online. Early testing in the 1980s and 1990s could only say so much. Samples were consistent with certain profiles, but not airtight. The case stayed technically unsolved. Meanwhile, Stephen Crawford lived a strangely quiet life in the shadow of a crime he was always loosely associated with but never charged in. He stayed in the Bay Area. He worked security. He knew, at least by the 2000s, that detectives still had an eye on him. They'd talked to him more than once over the years. By the 2010s, DNA technology had changed the landscape. Those old samples from the kneeler and the candles could now be examined at a level that simply didn't exist in the 70s or 80s. In 2018, cold case investigators got results they hadn't seen before. New testing, using modern methods, pointed clearly in one direction: the DNA from the crime scene matched Stephen Crawford. The guard. The man who claimed to lock the doors and later discover the body. The science that hadn't been strong enough to charge him in the 1970s was now robust enough that detectives were ready to make their move. On June 28, 2018, Santa Clara County Sheriff's deputies went to Crawford's condominium in San Jose with a search warrant. He was 72 years old. According to officials, when they knocked and announced themselves, Crawford retreated into a back room and closed the door. There was a brief standoff. Deputies forced entry. Crawford turned a gun on himself and pulled the trigger before they could arrest him. Later that day, at a press conference, Sheriff Laurie Smith announced that, based on the DNA evidence and the totality of the case, they believed Arlis Perry's killer had finally been identified: Stephen Blake Crawford. No trial. No confession. No cross-examination. But after 40-plus years, the closest thing to an answer the case was ever going to get. For Arlis's family back in North Dakota, the news landed with a complicated weight. On one hand, there was a measure of closure. This wasn't a roaming cult, not a nameless stranger vanishing into the dark. It was a man with keys. A man whose job was literally to watch over the building where she went to pray. On the other hand, there would never be a day in court, no guilty verdict, no chance to hear him explain why. The system had finally caught up with the evidence, but time had run out on any kind of legal reckoning. Stanford, for its part, acknowledged the resolution of the case and quietly emphasized what it had already been doing: upgrading security, rethinking how places that feel sacred also have to be treated as physical spaces that can be vulnerable. The church that once held a hidden crime scene went back to being a place for weddings, memorials, and services. But for the people who remember 1974, it will always carry another story. So what do you do with a case like this, nearly 50 years later? There's a version of it that just feeds into dark curiosity, ritual killing, church murder, cult connections. It's the version that gets repeated in half-remembered campus legends and late-night internet threads. It's the version that turns a real young woman into a prop in someone else's horror story. But the reality is something both smaller and more devastating. There was no demon in the architecture, no curse carved into the stone. There was a man who had access, power, and opportunity. A man trusted with the keys to a building that people assumed would be safe precisely because it was a church, because it was on a respected campus, because security guards are supposed to be the ones who protect you, not the ones you need protection from. The ritual elements at the scene, as shocking as they were, don't require a shadowy cult to explain them. They can be explained by one person's cruelty, one person's need to shock, humiliate, and control even after death. That's less cinematic, but no less terrifying. If you zoom out a little, the Arlis Perry case hits a couple of themes that come up again and again in true crime. Safe spaces aren't magic shields. Churches, campuses, hospitals, camps, they feel safe because of what they represent, but they're still just buildings in the world. The safety comes from the people and systems protecting them, not the bricks and stained glass. Systems fail quietly, and fix themselves slowly. In 1974, the investigators weren't incompetent, they were limited. They took prints, stored evidence, followed leads. The science just wasn't there yet. It took decades and massive advances in DNA testing to get an answer the case probably deserved from the beginning. Stories can drift away from the victim. The longer a case stays unsolved, the more room there is for theories, books, and documentaries. Arlis's name has been pulled into Satanic-panic narratives, cult maps, and Son of Sam conspiracies. But if you strip that away, she's still what she was on that last night, a 19-year-old newlywed who wanted to pray after a fight. That's the part that's easy to lose when you only talk about candles and cults. If you visit Stanford Memorial Church today as a tourist, you might not know any of this. You'd see the mosaics, the chapel, the walkways. You'd hear about architecture and earthquakes and Jane Stanford's vision for a non-denominational church. Somewhere, in a line or two, there might be a passing mention of a murder here in the 1970s. But for the people who loved Arlis, the story isn't about a building. It's about a daughter and a friend who never came home. It's about the sick feeling of waiting for a call, then getting the worst one. It's about 4 decades of not knowing, followed by an answer that arrives only when the man responsible is already beyond the reach of any judge. If you follow cases like this, and you do, because you're here, it's worth asking yourself. When you talk about them, are you talking about the person? Or just the setting and the twist? If you ever have credible information about a cold case, this one or any other, take it to law enforcement first. Don't harass victims' families or people you've decided are suspects because of something you saw in a documentary or a forum thread. Don't trespass, don't play detective in active crime scenes, and don't turn real trauma into a scavenger hunt. Most of the time, the people closest to the case have already lived through more fear than you'll ever hear in a podcast. You've been listening to Fear Files, Real Cases. Dark Details. Take care in the places you assume are automatically safe. Remember the people at the center of these stories, not just the rumors around them. And the next time you step into a quiet church to think, or to pray, spare a moment for a 19-year-old who did the same thing on a cool October night in 1974, and never walked back out.